Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri was directed by Martin McDonough and stars Frances McDormand, Woody Harrelson, and Sam Rockwell. Frances McDormand plays Mildred, a woman who is distraught over the murder of her daughter, and even more disturbed by the police force's lack of interest in investigating the case. So she takes action by renting out three billboards, calling the police force out. So I'm going to be honest here. Chris and I are both in total agreement about what score to give this movie. So instead of doing our separate good and bad, we thought it would be interesting for us to each present our own take on this movie. So reviewing this movie, for me, is kind of difficult because there is so much here that I want to recommend and so much that I want to talk about. I could go on and on about how great this movie is, but I'd like to condense my thoughts to just a few things that really stood out to me. Take it from me, you will not be disappointed if you see this movie. First off, the acting. Frances McDormand plays one of the strongest female characters I've ever seen in a movie. She really stands up for what she believes in, no matter what. What I also enjoyed, though, is that she's a flawed character. All of these characters in this movie are really well-rounded, and the actors just sell it. They become these people. Not any of them are perfect, but they're all just interesting to watch and learn about. Woody Harrelson also does a great job, and Sam Rockwell was probably my favorite character in this movie. He has an arc that I was not expecting, and he's just a really interesting character. Two of the standouts for me, though, from the supporting cast were Caleb Landry Jones and Peter Dinklage. Caleb Landry Jones plays a character that is very different from his character in Get Out, and he does a fantastic job with it. And Peter Dinklage, as always, is incredible. The directing here also really stood out to me. Martin McDonough has a way of directing sequences that just stick into your brain. There's one sequence from Seven Psychopaths that I will just always remember. And Three Billboards has another sequence that is just burned into my memory. It's a sequence involving a character taking out some frustration on another character that doesn't really deserve it. And the music, the cinematography, the way that the whole sequence was filmed is done in such a way that I was just in awe sitting in this theater. Honestly, though, the best part of this movie was the writing. All of the other elements are incredible. And I'm definitely not discounting the directing, the acting, all of that. But the writing is just absolutely mesmerizing. It brings you into this world and keeps you interested for the entire runtime. I mentioned before that these characters are all so well-rounded, and that really is a tribute to the writing of this movie. I felt like walking away from this movie that I knew all of these people on a personal level. That is how effective it is at setting up these characters and making you feel for them. This is a movie that deals with how we as humans react to grief. And it does it in such a fantastic way that I was just left speechless by this movie. There's also the comedy. Following in the footsteps of Seven Psychopaths and In Bruges, there's a lot of comedic relief in this movie. And it's handled so well. This is a movie that deals with a lot of painful, difficult themes. And some of the comedy you'd think would be really jarring up next to that subject matter. But it's not. It's handled very well, and it's really enjoyable. Guys, if you can't tell, I loved this movie. You owe it to yourself to see it, and it comes highly recommended from me.
Alright guys, so I'm not going to go extremely in-depth on like the acting and the storytelling and the writing and all that stuff. I think Walter covered that pretty well, so I just want to tell you about my personal opinions with this movie. Now, I went into this movie expecting a very solid, well-rounded movie. I think Martin McDonough is an extremely, extremely good director, but this one really, it surprised me. It surprised me a lot, and in the best way possible. Like, to the extent that after we watched the movie, I sat in the car and I was almost like blown away at how invested I was in this movie and how much I just loved every minute of it. I mean, these characters are so real and they're so flawed and they're so believable that it just made you love it. And it was so refreshing to see a movie that got this big of a release do that to you. It was really, really refreshing. And I have to give major props to the acting in this movie. I think everybody did phenomenal. I think this movie was perfectly cast all the way around. And it got nominated for 3 different Oscars in acting, including Frances McDormand and Woody Harrelson, which I think both of them were phenomenal. Sam Rockwell as well, like Walter mentioned, absolutely incredible. And I think between them and all of the other characters, they just set up this ridiculous world that, like I said before, it feels real, but it is so different and it's weird. It feels like this really small, knit community where everybody kind of knows each other and everybody kind of loves each other, but they also kind of hate each other. And it was so cool how you just kind of felt like you were a part of this really small town for the 2 hours that this movie goes on. Now, something that I really appreciated about this movie is how unconventional it is. It sets up the characters just like really any other movie you'd see, but it sets them up in a way that you think, okay, this is the good guy, this is the bad guy, and then you kind of expect things to go from there. But the way it actually plays out, the good guys become the bad guys become the good guys, and you're kind of rooting for all of them at the same time you're not rooting for any of them. And it's so interesting to see all these different layers of all of these characters. It's unlike any other movie I've ever seen. It was so refreshing and so just liberating to be in the theater watching a movie like this. I loved all the characters. And one thing that I didn't mention, Walter did mention it already, and so sorry for sounding redundant, but this movie is weirdly hilarious. This is a very dark movie. There's not a lot that goes well for anybody here, but there's a lot of comic relief here, and usually that's not a good thing in a movie like this, but it was all handled so incredibly well. There were a couple of characters that were there for comic relief, and I thought they were absolutely hilarious. And a lot of that is because it was believable and it actually played into the story. And I think a lot of that plays into how well this entire movie flows. The comedy was excellent, the drama was excellent, and like I've probably said this 5 or 6 times now, but it felt so real, and the whole thing just worked, like to an extent that I did not expect going into this thing. Like Walter said, I think you guys definitely owe it to yourselves to go see this movie. It was nominated for Best Picture, which I was stoked out of my mind to hear because it's just that good of a movie. I was so impressed with every aspect of it. Now, I've already seen this movie a couple of times and I cannot wait to see it again. I even saw it just last night and it again solidified how much I loved this movie. I will watch it again and again and again when I get it on Blu-ray. And I think you guys definitely should give this one a shot. Alright guys, so I have to say I loved this movie. And I do not give out scores like this very often. And I know this is early in the channel, and we hesitated to do this one for a while just because of this. But I have to say that this movie is a 10 out of 10.
There's nothing else that I can add. It's a 10 out of 10 for me as well. Thanks so much for your support and for watching the video. If you liked what we had to say, leave a like. If you didn't, leave a dislike and let us know your thoughts in the comments.